U.S. Republicans are told to attack China when asked about America's coronavirus crisis. A leaked 57-page memo also advises candidates not to defend Trump, just attack China. What is this anti-China messaging campaign all about? Will the American public buy those talking points? How will the China issue shape the 2020 U.S. presidential campaigns? Welcome to The Point, coming to you from Beijing. I'm Wang Guan, sitting in for Lyu Xiang. To discuss all these issues and more in Beijing, I'm joined by Einar Tangen, independent current affairs commentator, and via Skype by Lyu Xiang, research fellow at Chinese Academy of Social Sciences and expert on China-U.S. relations, and on the phone by Mr. Zhao Hai, research fellow, also from the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. Well, this leaked memo, also called Corona Big Book, is one in a series issued by the National Republican Senatorial Campaign Committee. Let's first of all take a look at their main lines of attack. Here it goes. Number one, the memo asked the Republican candidates to say that China caused this pandemic by covering it up, lying and hoarding the world's supply of medical equipment. The coronavirus is likely the result of an accidental release from a Chinese research facility. And number two, the memo asked the Republicans to say that my opponent, meaning the Democrats, is soft on China, fails to stand up to the Chinese Communist Party, and cannot be trusted to take them on. And number three, China should pay a price for arresting doctors who try to warn about the pandemic. We should impose sanctions on China and treat China like the pariah state that they are. Wow. And number four, don't defend Trump other than the China travel ban, attack China. So Einar, quite shocking allegations there, or maybe not so shocking. Your takeaways from this memo?
Well, I was involved in politics and running campaigns, and this is not untypical of this kind of go-for-the-throat approach. Now, you have to understand who O'Donnell and Associates is. The guy named O'Donnell was convicted of lying to a congressional ethics committee. He's a criminal. So it's not surprising that he would take this kind of no-holds-barred view. This is what they bring them in for. Now, I think it's interesting that it was, in fact, leaked. And, the question is who put it out. Because this was sent out to all the candidates in the Republican Party on the Senate side. So this is a real indication that they have very little else to talk about. And that this is going to be not only the Republican side's major strategy, but also Donald Trump's.
Well, do you think these talking points will work, Einar? How are the Democrats responding to all this? Are they saying, look, you guys are deflecting blame to China from your own failures to contain this pandemic?
Well, you'd like to think that they wouldn't work, because if you read through the 57-page document, there's absolutely no factual basis. What they do is they reference a series of articles which are, in essence, talk points that they created. So very, very little proof. They point to a memo here, and then they build a lot of conjecture on this. But they're not looking to prove this in a court of law. What they're trying to do is expand this beyond America's shores. So that's why they're going to Britain, to Australia, other countries, asking them to embrace these ideas so that it can help Donald Trump. And not surprisingly, many of these countries are doing so because they're in a situation, the same as Trump, that they muffed. They did not do a good job on preparing for the serious pandemic that they're involved in. So it's very easy to kind of embrace this idea, it's not my fault. Now, in terms of the Democrats, very interesting. Not a peep out of them. They are looking at this document purely in terms of saying that this is a weak strategy, and that if this is what all the Republicans have, that they think that they can take a good percentage of the 35 seats that are in contention. Now, keep in mind, 25 out of the 35 seats that will be on the ballot this time around are being defended by Republicans. So they are vulnerable, and there's a lot of fundraising on the Democratic side. Outside challengers in Lindsey Graham and McDonald's districts have actually outraised them recently. But many of these Republicans are sitting on large war chests, and with the economic difficulties that they're facing, it's not probable that there's going to be a very effective fundraising mechanism for them. We'll have to see how the Democrats do. But they want no part of defending China, that's clear.
Sure. Mr. Zhao, what arguments from the memo stick out to you?
Well, there are 2 points I agree with Einar. That is, number one, this is not surprising that the Republican Party has been long attacking China since the beginning of the Trump administration. And secondly, also it's not surprising this is quite a weak campaign strategy, only focusing on China other than other issues, making Republican parties look extremely weak. And they expose themselves to a lot of attacks from Democrats. However, I disagree with Einar a little bit. That is also related to the third point of this strategy. It says that don't defend Trump other than attacking the China travel ban and focusing on attack China. Interestingly, I think this is not an easy conclusion. I think they've done their homework and they've tried probably focus group or referring to polling results, and they realized that the 2 things that would work. Number one is to attack China because now there's so much negative views on China, and many people want to blame China in the United States. And number two, don't defend Trump. It's not an easy position to take. I think they've tested the waters and believe that at this point, defend Trump is not a viable strategy. Therefore, they wanted to want those candidates not to actively defending Trump, but actually actively attacking China instead. So I think this overall strategy is really problematic, and that's probably the reason that this has been leaked and maybe not actively used by many Republican candidates.
Well, Mr. Liu, do you agree that this memo comes after meticulous research and polling? What's your assessment of this memo and especially the timing of its release?
Okay, Wang Guan, actually, basically I agree with Einar and Mr. Zhao about their remarks. And, there are 3 fronts for the general election of this year. The first is the president. The second is the House of Representatives. And the third is the Senate. And for president, for the new presidency, actually, Mr. Trump now is in the inferior status. And
well, Mr. Liu, are you still with us? Wow. I think, unfortunately, we lost Mr. Liu from the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. Mr. Zhao Hai, do you want to pick up on what Mr. Liu just said? The timing of the release.
Yeah, well, that's the problem of technology, right? It's sometimes
it's the state of television these days. Social distancing.
Yeah, exactly, and that's actually related to the topic that we're talking about today, because now, like Professor Liu has pointed out, that you have a huge campaign coming up, not only the presidential position, but also, the Senate and the congressional seats. The problem is now, those people cannot go out there and doing their normal campaign. They have to do that by either going online or, finding some electronic ways to connect with their potential voters. So now that's making them very difficult to directly communicate with the voters, particularly for President Trump, because Trump was very good at making huge campaign rallying and also communicating with the voters directly, particularly in those southern states or other, the Rusty Belt states. So at this point, it's very difficult for Trump to go out there campaigning. Therefore, he needs to have a very sharp strategy, very simple and very easy strategy for him to communicate, either through Twitter or through other means to go with it. So I think this strategy is designed particularly for the people who have no other means to communicate at this particular point, and using this China hate right now in American society more effectively.
Right, sharp and simple messaging. We saw a whole lot of those 4 years ago. But guess what? Even President Donald Trump himself and his campaign is not happy about this memo. For example, the memo prepared the Republican candidates for possible questions, and one question is this. When asked if the coronavirus outbreak in the U.S. is Trump's fault, don't defend Trump. Attack China. It went on to say that, of course, China is to blame, but other than that, here it goes. This is the important point. It asks Republican candidates to say this: "I wish that everyone acted earlier. That includes our elected officials, the World Health Organization, and the CDC." So Einar, according to Politico, Trump's political advisor said Republican candidates who want to win will be running with the president, and candidates will listen to the bad advice in this memo at their own peril. So apparently there's division inside the Republican Party caused by this memo. No?
Well, I think I'm going to disagree a little bit with Zhao Hai. Now remember, what is Trump's position in this? He needs a group of people echoing his talk points. And at this point, he's the only one who says he's doing a great job, of course, other than his son-in-law, Jared Kushner. But you know, what he's trying to do is take the election away from a referendum on him, make it all about China, all right? He doesn't want to discuss the fact that he didn't do anything for these 2 months, that he was too lightly, that he was warned, you know, a dozen times by different top aides, the Pentagon, etc., that this was a real problem. He can't do that. So he has to have somebody echoing this point that it's all China, all China. And this is the weakness of it. This is a one point of things. So while his people are saying, oh, don't disparage the president, the fact is there's no way this document wasn't prepared without his knowledge. Remember, this is being sent to all of the Republican candidates. The chances that it wouldn't get to the White House are absolute zero. So this is just a little pantomime that is going on. This is very common. I was involved in similar things where you'd leak something out and say, well, no, who put that out there? Or saying, oh, we disagree with that. You're trying to control the narrative. That's what a campaign is all about. So right now, it's all about, for the Trump organization and the Republican Party, blame China, but the Democrats aren't taking the bait. And they are doubling down on China at the same time, realizing that 66% of Americans have now been positioned to be against China, mostly by the repetition of documents like this.
Right. That Pew Research saying that 66% of Americans have unfavorable views of China, an all-time record since the founding of the Pew Research, is pretty, again, shocking to many. So, Mr. Liu, I understand you're back with us, and we're sorry about that. You were earlier talking about this memo and your take, your assessment on this memo and the timing of this release. Please go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I said that actually Mr. Trump is very weak in this year's election, so he needs to be offensive, because being defensive is weak. So he don't like to be weak, so like to be very offensive. So he needs a target, and China is an easy target for him. He may scapegoat China and then say to his audience that, okay, it's not my fault, it's China's fault, and all your suffering are from China. So this is his strategy, and it's also a strategy for most Republican candidates for Senate. And a few U.S. senators, Republican senators, are vulnerable in this election, so they are also want to be very offensive. Okay, so that's my understanding.
All right, gentlemen, we'll take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll look at the factors fueling the rise in attacks against China, and how will that impact the state of 2020 U.S. presidential campaign. Stay with us.
Making sense of the overwhelming wave of information means cutting through the noise to shine a light on the heart of the story and making room for new perspectives. True understanding means the ability to see events from more than one side. I'm Lyu Xiang, and this is The Point.
Well, Einar, I want to go to you for our second part of the discussions. President Ronald Reagan used to say, famously, that when it comes to domestic politics and elections, it is the economy, stupid. But the economy is in pretty sad state of affairs, as many argue these days. A negative 5% growth in the first quarter for the United States, and some predict a negative 10 to 20% growth in the second quarter. How do you think the current economic crisis will impact the course of the campaign in the months to follow?
Well, we're discussing it. It's that memo. I mean, there's no way of defending it. I mean, Donald Trump is on record excoriating previous presidents for, drops of 1,000 points in the Dow, saying they should be taken out and beaten and, kicked out of the White House. Now he's presided over something that is much more cataclysmic than that. So he's gone to this other side. So at this point, it is absolutely working against him, and it's not going to be pretty.
Well, Einar, a Reuters poll recently shows that Biden is leading Trump 44% versus 40% among registered voters. And in the key Midwestern swing states of Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, Biden is leading 45% to 39%. Does this spell trouble for Trump and explaining the focus of blaming China?
Yes, it does. And here's a reason why. Just let's take the Asian vote. Never mind that the Hispanic vote is going to go even more strongly against him, or that the African-American vote is going to go strongly for Biden. Just the Asian votes alone in those 3 states are 453,000. Now, the cumulative total of votes that were swung towards Donald Trump were 80,000. So do the math. If only 25% of Asians go for Trump this time around, he loses those 3 key states. The states that put him above, if Hillary had taken those states, she would have been president. He is in deep trouble. And, he made a calculation to attack China. Unfortunately for him, Americans can't tell the difference between Chinese, Japanese, Korean, or any other Asian group. And as a result, they're all being targeted for this vitriol, for attacks, for racial slurs, go home, all sorts of things. They're not going to be very happy about Donald Trump this time around.
Right. Mr. Zhao, in an interview with Reuters on Wednesday, Donald Trump said China will do anything they can to have me lose this presidential race, adding that he believes Beijing wants his rival, Joe Biden, to win this November's presidential election. Do you think Trump has a point?
Well, whenever Trump has political difficulties, he will say that. This is not the first time. Remember last year when China and the United States are locked in the trade war, President Trump also said that China wants him gone, wanted to have a softer Democratic presidency, particularly Joe Biden, because Joe Biden's son is somehow connected with China. Those are the narratives that connected to the strategy we've talked about just now. And the overall attention is to make Democrats, Joe Biden particularly, look bad to the American voters and connect them with the Chinese. That strategy sometimes works for the base, for Trump's own base, but not necessarily for the majority of American voters. I think he said this again at this particular time, shows that he's now under great pressure. And again, he's trying to shift blame towards China. And this strategy, I think in the short run, maybe will have him have consolidate more base. But in the long run, just like Einar said, it's going to alienate more voters for him, and it's not a winning strategy.
Well, Mr. Liu, I want to turn to you. How does China's academic circle look at the state of U.S. presidential elections? We know that China has a non-interference policy, but from a pure academic point of view, international relations, political point of view, does the Chinese academic circle think a Biden White House will make Washington less hostile towards Beijing, perhaps?
Okay, actually, it's a bit too early to predict the result of this year's election, but there are many signs that Mr. Trump is in a very weak position, especially in the states you just mentioned. The 3 most important swing states this year are firstly is Michigan, and then it's Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. They are called the Rust Belt states, and there are quite large number of working class people there. Mr. Trump's strategy is to focus on this working class people and saying the Chinese workers are competing with you, so they are taking your meals. So this kind of rhetoric may take some impact. And actually, in last election, this kind of rhetoric did some impacts. But I think the working class people in these states now they understand actually the trade war and other measures that have not benefited their living. So this year, I think Mr. Trump will very probably to lose in these three most important states.
Well, Mr. Zhao, I want to turn to you. It looks like criticizing China is shaping up to be Republicans' 2020 campaign strategy, but where does this leave the Democrats? Do you think they will ramp up their own versions of anti-China rhetorics? How will they shake off the soft on China image?
No, that's not true, soft on China. Actually, if you look at Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, and also Joe Biden himself, they've been criticizing China for a long time, the House Democrats. And also Joe Biden himself recently also toughened his tone on China. So overall, I think this is not a pure Republican strategy. Democrats also wanted to criticize China. It is just that they want to criticize Trump more. At this point, Democrats wanted to make the election of 2020 a national referendum on Trump himself, and that, I think, will be a good strategy. However, the problem is the electability of Joe Biden, and now people are very much focused on who would be the vice presidential candidate for Joe Biden, and that's critical. For me, I think at this point, it's very hard to change the perception of China for many Americans, including this bipartisan consensus on China. The way forward actually is to do the best for China itself and to recover its economy and also helping others to recover from the pandemic. In the long run, I think there's only the only possible outcome would be cooperation, but in the short run, we'll experience more difficulties.
All right, gentlemen, I want to turn to another topic that is one of my favorite subjects, the state of, the war of words, propaganda or 宣传, publicity, whatever you call it. This memo, the GOP memo that we have been talking about, was authored by the political consulting firm of Brett O'Donnell, a veteran Republican strategist who has advised the former President George Bush of the U.S. and also the Brexit campaign in the U.K. O'Donnell once said, and I want to show you this, one of the most important things in these debates, referring to the U.S. presidential debates, is that you drive message and that you have a moment that capture the press's and the audience's imagination, not just get on with facts and figures. Einar, any thoughts?
Yes, I mean, having prepared people for debates, I would agree. You're always trying to get that magic moment when everything kind of coalesces. If you're up against an opponent who's, throwing facts and figures in, you lose the audience very, very quickly. You have to establish, especially the larger the audience, the more important it is to establish an emotional bond. And in this respect, Donald Trump was terrific. He did much better than Hillary in these debates. Despite his very odd behavior, he was able to make that kind of emotional connection. And that's what O'Donnell's talking about. He's not, the message is just crafted to elicit this emotion. So, yeah, I agree that that's the technical side. But, what he's doing, the fact that he's a convicted criminal, I mean, it's a little much to take that, people are taking advice from a guy like this.
Well, Mr. Zhao, why do you think America's power of setting agendas are so strong, its discursive power, and also its, the credibility of some of its media, their ability to set agendas? Why is that?
Well, I think you pointed out the key word, that is, it is dispersed, discrete, and also this is a decentralized system. America has always had a superior propaganda machine over China because its machine, like I said, it's not focused on the governmental propaganda machine, but also, dispersed throughout the society. So it can use more power of the people of the society to carry out its propaganda purpose. And I think in the future, China needs to learn from the American model and do more, not state propaganda, but also not just propaganda, but publicity per se, having to voice more people's opinions instead of using, for instance, its diplomatic voice or its state newspapers or TV. That way, it's easier for Americans to criticize China and pin every opinion towards the Communist Party of the state. Actually, China has a very diversified opinion pool, and a lot of people have different opinions, and very, very vivid and viable. I think in the future we need to mobilize that force and use that to the outside world, letting them know that we have all those opinions, and they are very diversified, not just nationalism.
Good points. I would second that. Mr. Liu, compared to America's political messaging system, China's narratives are often labeled as propaganda. How do you think China can, make its narrative more credible to the Western world? What are the challenges right now?
Okay, first of all, I want to say actually the United States has a very long history for propaganda. Its state apparatus was established during the First World War.
Right.
But they abandoned the word propaganda. They used the word like public information, and then now they call it strategic communications. So actually, on our side, I think our task is to telling the world the truth. What is really happening in China? What's our problems and what's our solutions? And at this moment, I want to say the outbreak of the virus in China is a good case for us to do a better job. Actually, in the past months, we see our media, including CGTN, have done a lot in making people know what's happening in China, how many efforts we have done to contain the virus. So I don't think we need special propaganda efforts. Actually, what we are going to do is just to make people know what's happening in China, what's our problems, and what is our solutions. Our solutions may not be the best in the world, but it can be one of the best.
All right, we have about 30 seconds left. Well, there's such a thing as, a saying that says politics stops at water's edge. And you also mentioned that when it comes to domestic politics, there's vibrant debate in the U.S., but when it comes to attacking China, there's consensus in the U.S., right, through the past century.
Is that to me?
Mr. Liu, please.
Yeah. Actually, generally, we can say that the U.S., the American attitudes towards China is negative. But if we look into the details, we can see some difference. On the Republican side, more registered Republican voters like to touch China as an enemy, as a rival, or even a competitor, something like that. But on the Democratic side, we see their sentiment is a bit different. They see Russia as a more severe, more hostile.
I'm sorry, Mr. Liu, but I'm afraid that's all the time we have. And I want to also thank our viewers from around the world for tuning in.
Okay.
This is The Point. I'm Wang Guan, sitting in for Lyu Xiang. Have a good night.